At 69, I was supposed to be invisible. That's what my own daughter and her husband made me feel, like a tired ornament in the corner of the bakery I built with flour-stained hands and sleepless nights. The bell above the door jingled that morning, and the smell of cinnamon and apple pie filled the air. Customers lined up, chatting warmly, but I wasn't the one they looked at anymore. My son-in-law, Mark, strutted through the shop as if he had laid every brick himself. No, make it look modern. He barked at a young cashier arranging pastries. Nobody wants grandma's pies in this market. The words cut sharper than a knife through dough. I stood behind the counter, wiping flour off my apron, my face calm though my chest burned. Claire, my daughter, glanced at me with a smile that carried no sweetness. "Mom," she said gently, the way you talk to a child, "why don't you just sit down and greet the customers? Leave the hard work to us." Her voice was honey over vinegar. To the customers, it sounded like kindness. To me, it was dismissal. I looked down at my hands resting on the counter, hands that once mixed every batch of dough, that once carried this bakery through storms and debts, that once held my husband's as we prayed for just enough customers to keep the lights on. Now those hands trembled not from weakness but from anger. "They forgot," I whispered to myself. "They forgot the woman who wrote the recipe. They forgot who built this place from nothing but sugar, sweat, and faith." And in that moment, as I lifted my eyes to the old wooden sign above the door, Carter's Bakery, since 1983, I made a silent promise they would remember. A week later, Claire and Mark invited me to dinner. They dressed it up like a family gathering, white wine, candles, napkins folded neat. For a moment, I almost believed they wanted to celebrate me, but the smiles were too rehearsed, the air too polished, and halfway through the meal the knife slid in. Mark set his glass down with a grin that never reached his eyes. "We've decided it's time to rebrand," he announced. "New logo, new recipes, a fresh identity for Carter's Bakery." Claire leaned closer, her hand brushing mine as if that could soften the blow. "Mom, people don't want old-fashioned anymore. Times have changed. You'll still have a place here, of course, but we can't keep paying you. It's time to think about retirement." The word stung, retirement, as if they were gently escorting me out of my own life's work. I looked at the table, at the wine that suddenly tasted bitter. My fork lay untouched beside the roast chicken. For years, I had poured every ounce of myself into that bakery, 40 years of flour-dusted mornings and sleepless nights. And now my own blood was telling me I was irrelevant. I forced a smile, the kind you wear to stop your voice from cracking. "Well," I said quietly, "you two seem to have it all figured out." They relaxed, mistaking my silence for surrender. But deep inside, under the ache, a spark flickered to life. They thought they were writing the bakery's next chapter. They didn't know I still held the first page signed, stamped, and waiting. That night, after the dinner, I sat alone in my kitchen. The house was silent, except for the steady tick of the wall clock. I closed my eyes, and the years folded back like pages of an old recipe book. I was 29 again, standing in a tiny kitchen with my husband, Robert. The air was thick with flour dust and the smell of butter melting in the oven. We were broke, exhausted, but we believed in one thing. If we could put love into a pie, people would taste it. I remembered Robert's laugh when the first customer bit into our apple pie and whispered, "This tastes like home." That sentence paid us more than money ever could. We worked until dawn most nights. My hands blistered from kneading, my back ached from leaning over the oven, but I didn't stop, because this bakery wasn't just a dream, it was survival. And I remembered the day Robert handed me an envelope. "Helena," he said, "if we're going to make this bakery last, you need to protect what you created." Inside was a certificate from the U.S. Copyright Office. The recipe, my recipe, filed and registered under my name. I held it in my hands, the ink still fresh, the paper stiff. It wasn't just flour and sugar anymore. It was legacy. It was proof that Carter's bakery began with me. The memory faded, and I opened my eyes to the quiet of my kitchen. My hands, older now, still bore faint scars from those early years. I whispered into the silence. They think I'm irrelevant, but I still hold the recipe, and I still hold the power. A week later, Claire called again. "Mom," she said sweetly, "we want you to come with us. There's something exciting we'd love to share." I should have known better, but part of me, the foolish part that still wanted to believe, hoped they had remembered who I was. They drove me to a downtown restaurant I hadn't been to in years. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, waiters gliding like shadows. For a moment, I felt out of place, like an intruder in someone else's world. At the table sat 3 men in sharp suits. Investors. Mark clasped my shoulder like a politician shaking hands. "Mom, this is a big night. Carter's Bakery is about to go national. These gentlemen are prepared to buy in, millions of dollars, a real future." One of the men leaned forward, smiling. "Mrs. Carter, your bakery has history. That's valuable branding. With some new recipes, a modern image, we can take this nationwide." I felt the ground tilt under me. It wasn't just a rebrand, it was a sale. My life, my marriage, my blood and sweat, packaged, priced, and prepared for strangers. Claire poured me wine with that same sugar-sweet smile. "Mom, think of it this way," she said softly. "You'll finally get to rest, no more long hours. You deserve to enjoy what's left of your life." What's left of my life? The table blurred. Their voices echoed as if from a distance. They thought this was mercy. They thought this was love. But what I heard was a death sentence for everything I had ever built. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply smiled, took a sip of wine, and nodded as if I had accepted my role as the relic they believed me to be. But inside, I burned, because I knew something they didn't. I still had the paper. I still had the recipe. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the restaurant's laughter still echoing in my ears. My daughter's words circled in my head like vultures. "You'll finally get to rest, what's left of your life." I turned on the lamp. Its warm light spilled across the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. My hands shook as I lifted the lid, releasing the scent of old wood and lavender. Inside lay decades of my life, photographs, letters, Robert's wedding band, and beneath them a thick envelope, edges yellowed with time. I slid it out slowly, almost reverently, and opened the flap. The paper inside was crisp, the ink bold even after 40 years. United States Copyright Office registration no. 1983-4217. Recipe, Carter's apple pie. Registered to Helena Carter. I traced my finger over my name. My husband's voice echoed in my memory. "Protect what you've built, Lena. Someday you'll need this more than you know." Tears welled in my eyes, not from weakness, but from vindication. They thought they could erase me. They thought my recipes were just grandma's pies. But they had forgotten I was the founder. And founders leave signatures that can't be scrubbed away. I folded the paper carefully, pressed it to my chest, and whispered into the empty room. "They'll remember me. Tomorrow they'll remember who really owns this bakery." The next morning the bakery was closed to the public. Inside, the air felt heavy with ambition and betrayal. Claire and Mark stood proudly at the long oak table, papers neatly stacked, coffee steaming in porcelain cups. Across from them sat 3 investors in dark suits, pens ready. Mark's voice boomed with confidence. "Gentlemen, today we begin a new chapter. Carter's Bakery is about to shed its old skin. With your backing, we'll launch nationwide. Fresh branding, modern recipes, a whole new identity." Claire added smoothly, "Of course, we'll honor the legacy and name. But let's be honest, no one's buying pies for nostalgia anymore." She smiled at the investors, ignoring me as if I were just another chair in the room. One of the men nodded. "This is promising. All we need are the signatures to finalize." Mark slid the contract across the table, his pen already in hand. "Let's seal the deal." And that was the moment I stood up. I walked to the head of the table, every eye turning toward me, some surprised I was even there. My hands didn't tremble as I placed a single document onto the polished wood. The sound of paper hitting oak cracked through the silence. "Before you sign anything," I said, my voice steady as steel, "there's something you should see." The nearest investor reached for the page, his brows furrowed, then lifted as he read aloud. "United States Copyright Office, Carter's Apple Pie, registered to Helena Carter." The room froze, Mark's face drained of color. "Mom, you kept that?" I met his eyes, then Claire's. My daughter's lips parted, but no words came. "Yes," I said calmly, "because I knew a day like this would come. You can change logos, you can repaint walls, but without this recipe, without me, you have nothing to sell." The investors leaned back, murmuring to each other. One closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. "No deal," he said flatly, "not without clear ownership." Mark slammed his fist on the table. Claire whispered, "Mom, how could you?" "How could I?" I cut her off, my voice rising for the first time. "I built this bakery. I stayed up while you slept. I bled into this dough. And you thought you could erase me with a contract?" Silence, heavy, final. The investors stood, shook my hand politely, and walked out, leaving Claire and Mark pale and speechless. The investors' footsteps faded down the hall, leaving the air thick with silence. Claire's face was flushed red, her eyes wet with fury. "Mom," she hissed, her voice trembling, "you've ruined everything. Do you know what we could have built?" Mark shoved the papers into his briefcase, his jaw tight. "Millions gone because you couldn't let go of the past. Unbelievable." I stood firm, hands steady on the table. "You call it the past. I call it my life's work, and you will not sell my name for profit." Mark shook his head and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. Claire lingered, her voice breaking. "You always had to be the center, didn't you? Even now, you couldn't let us lead." Her heels clicked angrily across the tile as she followed him out, leaving me alone with the echo of their resentment. For a moment, I felt the ache of it, losing not just children, but the illusion that they'd ever understood what Carter's bakery truly meant. But the ache didn't last, because when the front door swung open again, it wasn't Claire or Mark. It was Emily, a young baker who had worked beside me for years. Her apron was smudged with flour, her eyes wide with worry. "Mrs. Carter, is it true? They wanted to sell everything." I nodded, then placed the copyright paper back into its envelope. "They forgot who the founder was, but I didn't." Emily's eyes glimmered. "I'll help you, ma'am, whatever you need. I want to learn the real recipes, the ones you started with." A warmth spread through me, quiet but strong. Here she was, not family by blood, but family by respect. The kind of person Robert and I had always hoped this bakery would attract. I smiled, handing her a set of keys. "Then it's yours to learn. One day it'll be yours to lead." That evening, I reopened the bakery. Customers drifted back in, drawn by the smell of butter crusts and cinnamon sugar. Their faces lit up as they bit into pies that tasted exactly the way they remembered. Not trendy, not modern, just home. And as I watched Emily carry trays to the counter, her hands moving with care and reverence, I knew Carter's bakery would outlive me, not because of a rebrand, but because the original fire had been passed on. The sun was just rising over Austin, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. Inside Carter's bakery, the ovens glowed warm, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the quiet streets like a promise kept. I stood at the counter, my apron tied snugly, pulling a tray of golden pies from the oven. My hands were slower now, but steady. Beside me, Emily worked with a quiet focus, her young fingers shaping dough the way I had taught her, gentle, precise, full of care. She glanced up at me, flour smudged across her cheek. "Mrs. Carter, is this right?" she asked, holding up a perfectly crimped crust. I smiled, my chest swelling with pride. That's exactly right, you've got it. The bell above the door jingled and the first customer of the day stepped inside. A man in his 40s inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and sighed. "Smells like it did when I was a kid," he murmured. Emily beamed, sliding a pie into a box. I wiped my hands on my apron, watching her take her place at the counter, greeting the customer the way I once did. I turned toward the window. Outside, the morning light caught the old wooden sign above the door. Carter's Bakery since 1983. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening to the hum of ovens, the laughter of customers, and the steady rhythm of life returning to the place Robert and I had built. They thought I was too old to matter, I whispered to myself. But some things never age. A recipe, a legacy, a name. And as the sunlight poured across the counter, I knew. The bakery would outlast me, not because of a contract, not because of investors, but because the heart that built it was still beating, in every pie, every customer, and in the young hands I had chosen to carry it forward. They thought I was too old to matter, but legacy doesn't age, and neither do the hands that built it.